the good news is I told you I wander off a lot. So this is my topic. Remember it, because you're going to have to, about 15 minutes in, you go, what was this topic again? But what I'm going to talk about is big preservation. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a bunch of disparate things. And if I've done a good job at the end, you're going to understand how it fits together. If not, yeah, it'll be a little bit of a trip. How many people here are aware of big history and what that is? This is going to be a challenge. I travel way too much, and I can't sleep at night, and I absolutely abhor reality TV. Big history is actually going, why did all the civilizations develop in the plains, and why did they get conquered by the people in the mountains? So it kind of tells you the whole of how things happen as opposed to when Columbus discovered America. So we're going to go all the way around in big history. For those of you who may not know it, the Roman Empire conquered the world, and there's one of their roads right there. Notice the Roman road system was about the same size as the U.S. interstate. And look at the funding. It cost about the same as what it costs today. This is all taken forward in dollars. The Romans understood the importance of a transportation system. They actually conquered the world at that time. And they did it for military, and they did it for commerce. It wasn't just for war. They knew they had to have good roads. So if you haven't figured out, the first two presenters just set this up great, and thank you very much, and it just made me feel good. So I always use this slide. What you look over there where you see the little cloud, that's the Highway Trust Fund, 1993. I'm going to walk you through the implications, and there's actually 3 of them. So if you look on there, and I can't go like this because my arms are too short for this one, but you'll see the different consumer price indexes for the different products. So there's a couple messages here. We do life cycle costs going out 30 years, 50 years using consumer price index. It doesn't map back anymore to the different products. So that's something we got to do different. But look where that big cloud is in 1993 on the trust fund. What you're looking at on the bottom is time scale. Vertical axis is everything back to $1958. Nothing big there. What does that mean? This room, we all got together in 1993 and said, let's spend 100, or let's fix 100 miles of road or build 100 miles of road. We'd have a cost, we'd go out and do it. If we try to do that today, we can only build 67 miles. We've lost 1/3 of our buying power. You've heard that before, and that's what everybody talks about. Look in the bottom side down there. Excuse me. And I'm calling it the Arizona consumption rate because I do this for individual states. I'll show you a U.S. rate. But in 95, we drove about 40 billion vehicle miles. And in 2014, it's about 60 billion. 50% increase in wear-out rate and 1/3 of the buying power. 2 of the 3 things. Can't win. You heard this argument before. So here it is nationally. If you look at the green line, so the green is showing you the vehicle miles of travel. The brown is showing you new construction. So obviously this trend is not going to change. We're going to keep having more and more wear out of our roads. Well, here's the one that doesn't get talked about much. I've shown the gas tax again in 1993 in brown. And you'll notice both lines. The blue one is the car. This is legislation mandating the fuel efficiency of vehicles. Okay, so the blue is cars, the red is light trucks. So we've been humming along, perfectly horizontal till you hit about 2010. Okay, in 2010, you'll look at number 8, new car and light truck standards established 2012, 2016. Notice it's starting to shoot up. Now I drive a 1998, so I'm still smoking up the world and bad fuel miles, but eventually the fleet is going to catch up with us. So we have less buying power, our wear out rate is increasing, and now we're not going to generate the funds because of fuel efficiency. And if you look at number 9, 2017 to 25, look where that's going. And that's by legislation. Okay. So you can argue that Congress passed transportation legislation, and the gentleman in the back can help me better because I just called a friend who told me that, but I guess there's questions of whether it's funded or not. So this is my message, that every time every one of us needs to pass the message on funding. We can talk about preservation all we want, but doing less with nothing isn't preservation. We got to go back to planning and programming and have a vision of where we're going. So that's the message, one of the messages I'm going to leave. Now, I'm supposed to be talking about urban. Okay, what is urban? I left New York and moved to Arizona, so I left farm country, went to what now is the 6th largest city in the United States. I think I'm rural. Used to actually be on a ranch at one time, okay? So everybody thinks that way out west. We're all rural, we're not like back east. So the first thing I went to is Wikipedia. That's who gives the best definitions. And if you look at the European version, you have hamlets and villages and a whole bunch of cool stuff like that. And I said, that probably doesn't apply. So I went to the census. So census defines it as 50,000 people or more is an urban center. Doesn't give geographic range, or if it did, I missed it. But they call urban clusters 2,500 and less. So if I go 2,500 up, that's almost all of us, right? So everything I'm going to tell you applies to almost everything. And then I added the rural as everything else because I don't know what that means. So if you look at the 2010 census, I've drawn cryptic little red lines to define your geographic region that we all live in, or many of us do. And the little light green dots are the urban clusters, and the purple are the urban centers. So there's more out there, I think, than most of us would actually think. This is 2010 now. This isn't today. We're going to get into some of that. Okay, this is when you know this guy spends too much time in motels, okay? If you look at the slide in the lower left-hand corner, that's showing you how the geographic population center of the United States has shifted from the beginning. And I put that little blue dot in there because probably in another 50 or 60 years, it's going to be in this region. If you look at the top, you can see the years by which it did it. And I hope none of us think about that. I was actually stunned when I came across this, but I think, wow, people really do spend time on some of this stuff. But anyways, we're not as far away from the rest of the country as we think. But it also explains a lot about Congress. Just kidding. Okay, this fact's going to refute a little bit of what you heard earlier, but in about 3 or 4 more slides, I'll validate the number you heard earlier. But if you look in that little red box, what's really saying in about 45 years, we're going to go up about 100 million people. Remember that wear-out rate I was showing you? That was without the 100 million people. So it's only going to get worse and worse. The people like me, we had the good days. The rest of you guys got to still do something. And I don't envy any of you because I think it's going to be really tough. Okay, new urbanized areas. Notice there's actually quite a few up in the west. You could argue it's around the seacoast. You know, we're going to have seacoast in Arizona here not too many more years. All we got to do is get a little war. This is another 2010. This is showing you the high density places, and I'm going to show this slide near the end of the presentation. If you look at the bar right here, for those of you the far right hand corner on that side, that represents 20 million people. So like LA is 15 million people. The reason I say that, preservation treatments in those areas are different. The treatments are the same. How you go about it's different. I'm going to talk about that. But so when we say urban or rural, the same treatments are used in all the different areas. There isn't any magic out there. The application of those and the product selection is what's different. I'm going to go into that later on. Okay, this is a FHWA document I think you heard quoted earlier, and I would recommend everybody read it, and these aren't things that I read. The only thing I didn't like about it, all the solutions were mass transit, but like I said, I'm a rural guy, but it's a very good document for opening your eyes up, because most of us don't think about the road down the excuse me, down the way. The thing to note here, again, I've blocked off the Rocky Mountain. The darker the color, the greater the population increase. Look where the population is increasing. And this is 2010, by the way. Okay, so I'm trying to deliver a message here. If you look at the 2 bullets, traffic in the west, a block of 13 states, including Alaska and Hawaii, climbed to 58 billion unadjusted vehicle miles of travel. Okay, if you look at the second bullet, at 9.5%, Montana led the nation with the largest unadjusted single traffic percent increase compared to the same year earlier. I would consider Montana rural. It's not. Okay, there's the 70 million. So like I said, it depends where you want to get your statistics from. That's why I showed both. I don't have any dogs in this fight. But one of the other ones you see down there where it says you spend 40 hours a year stuck in traffic, I can show you another one that says you spend your 2-week vacation stuck in traffic. So if it feels like you don't have time to do anything, there's probably a good reason. And we heard reference to the major clusters. That's the lower left. Sorry guys, I can't, well maybe I can do this. There we go. Yeah, you guys got a brain after all. These little green things are the major urban clusters. That's how they're envisioning them coming out. Again, this is population. The dark, the higher the population change. Again, I'm just trying to reinforce this idea. And here's the congestion. If you look at 2011 versus 2040, there's going to be a lot of peak congestion in the Rocky Mountain states. You're not going to run from it. Okay, now we're going to get a little closer to preservation. And the other thing I want to announce to you, next year is the 125th anniversary of the first concrete pavement ever built in the United States. And you're looking at a picture of it right there between those two red lines. That picture was taken in 1925. Okay? Now these guys, and to show you that life hasn't changed, the city wouldn't let the contractor proposed it. And the city said no. He had to post a $5,000 bond in case it didn't work just to go build it at his cost. And he did. And it worked.
How long did it take to set up?
Actually, you could walk on it. It was more almost like RCC today. It's 5 inches thick. So those yellow lines you see right there, next year will be the 123rd anniversary of the longest pavement preservation concrete project in the United States, probably the world. That project still stands. And that's what it looked like in 2012. So think about that. Point is, you can preserve pavements. You got to have a plan. You got to have a belief. It isn't easy. This thing looks tore up. There's no question about it. But it can be done. Okay, taking it closer to preservation, if you want to get into it on concrete pavement preservation, CP Tech Center in 2014 developed a manual. It's the best thing going. I would encourage anybody who hasn't read it to get it, look at it. They're also doing training workshops. The red one obviously is behind us. But if you really hurry, you get to Illinois or Southern California. I don't know if Robert just came from there, but are you? Good man. But you notice North Dakota's coming up in December. Still have a chance to get up there. Yeah, I asked the same question. You got Washington? Okay, here's the typical pavement preservation treatments for concrete. And the thing, if you haven't seen me before, anything you do to concrete pavement, I consider preservation. I don't get into the semantics of what that means because the pavement doesn't care. It just wants me to make it last as long as I can. So what you're going to hear me use is the term the best value. I'm not so concerned when I'm doing it as a point of what's the best value of when I apply it. And so that's what I try and dictate, how I think. So you got diamond grinding and diamond grooving, and they're two separate products, just so you know. Partial and full depth patching, and we'll get into all these. Dowel bar retrofit, joint sealing or resealing, slab jacking, and longitudinal crack stitching. It's going to be the same treatments no matter where I do them. Whether I'm out on a road of 500 ADT or 500,000. How I do it and go about it, the products is going to be quite different. Grinding concrete, one thing I want to point out, let's do it with the mouse. Notice this little guy right here, this is called slurry disposal. This gets harder and harder to do in urban areas. I'm going to talk about this more later on, but I just want to make sure you see that picture and how that's being discharged. If you had any ideas of what diamond grinding is, it's just a series of, now I've lost my mouse. Okay, you can see the blades, you stack them all together, it's called a head. It goes back up underneath. Yeah, let's do it the old-fashioned way. We'll cheat half the guys. There's where you got the blades, you put them on a stack, the head runs this way, and it grinds this way. So you're removing a thin layer of concrete. That's what it looks like. This is the most used concrete slide in concrete preservation. Someday one of us is going to get out of the car and take another picture, and you guys won't have to look at the same thing. But you mark my words, when you see me next time or the next guy. This one I think was taken by Matt Ross back there, is that right? So Matt tried to get us to change, but again, I'm just trying to show you the corduroy texture. This is diamond grinding, okay? So again, you're doing it for friction, which quite frankly, most of it is done for smoothness and noise. Those are probably the two predominant uses. It gets done for friction, but you can also do grooving for friction. Picking on Robert right here, they've done the most recent study on how long does it last. If you base it on roughness like they did, meaning when at the time I ground the pavement, what was the roughness? How long does it take to get back to that same roughness level? The average was 17 years. In the West, or good parts of the West, we probably have the best performing concrete pavements. Notice the oldest is in Bellefontaine, Ohio, which isn't what I just said, but you've got some very old pavements in other places, not on that score, but you get phenomenal. These are plain jointed, undoweled pavements. So that's a pretty phenomenal experience. No, that didn't work out good. Okay, the other thing I want to mention, so you're aware of it, there are different types of diamond grinding, not grooving, but grinding. Is what we refer to as conventional diamond grinding, and that's what the head looks like right there. And if you want the ultimate noise surface, it's called next generation concrete surface. And notice there's very little space between the blades, and that's really the difference. It's similar blades, just arranged differently. There's also a texture called optimized texture for city streets. That's only been used in test sections, but if you ever need a finer grind, that's what it was developed for. And the reason being there was some agencies felt that they thought diamond grinding was an issue for skateboarders and bicyclists. So on city streets, they wanted a finer, so we developed it, but the whole time we're thinking, why would you want bicyclists and skateboarders in your street? But so that's another story. Okay, diamond grooving, what you'll see there, those same blades I was showing stacking on that head will be about 3/4 of an inch apart, and it cuts a 1/8 inch groove. It's really done for safety. It's preventive hydroplaning. You'll get better lateral stability, so it's a safety measure. You're going to see us trying to promote it not against high friction surfaces, but in addition. It's probably 1/10 of the cost and can reduce accidents. California actually developed this in the 1960s and has developed most of the research. Unfortunately, it's all old. The one caveat I'm going to have on here, notice the big red X. The only place it goes transverse, and that's tining or grooving, is runways. The noise issues in the concrete industry evolved from transverse tining. If you groove it, it's even worse. So if you want to screw up concrete pavement, transverse groove it. You may do it on a hairpin curve if you have to, and that alerts the driver, but you always want to do it longitudinally. Okay, this is, I live in Mesa, Arizona, which is a suburb of Phoenix. We set the record in 2006 for the number of days without rain in Phoenix. It was 143. I've been waiting about almost a year to try and get this picture. It started raining, I jumped in the car, I raced out, and what you see over here is the asphalt rubber friction course. Notice you got all kinds of splash and spray, there's water. This is, at the end of this, they hadn't completely covered up the freeway system yet. This is about Mesa Drive right in here, and that's a longitudinally grooved. It does move the water. It'll create the highest macro texture you can create because you just change the groove depth. Okay, let's talk about full depth repair. Now, the next slide you're going to see says this is a workhorse. And you'll notice the difference. You can either pull out a portion of a slab, a whole slab, multiple slabs, but who knows why we call it the workhorse? You feeling lucky? We don't preserve concrete pavements. I can show you 50 years of that. We wear them out, and once we break them, we got to go do something with them because the cars just complain. That's why you do full slab repairs. You should never have to get to that, except really, really far out. So. Anyway, there's the workhorse treatment. Again, it's replacement of the concrete interior joints and cracks. It might only be 2 or 3 feet of the slab. You notice it says focus on workmanship. If you screw that one up, you got a real problem because remember, you're going to try and get cars over that fresh concrete fairly soon. So it takes a little bit more care. And now thinking about the urban areas, when you may only have a 4 or 5 work window, they got to drive back over that stuff. So this is where the nuances come in different. And you can see the accelerated materials, precast repairs. We'll talk about some of that. That's just showing you some of the activities. I don't believe in what you're seeing, that temperature steel laying on the slab. I show that so I can complain about it. I do that a lot when you get old. I don't believe in. There better be a really good reason to use temperature steel. Full depth repairs, this is how ugly it can be, and probably most of us wouldn't consider this a real high density area, but you can see this is just like a war zone. So my guess is traffic's light enough they can survive this, but you can just see how hard it can be to place some of this stuff and have it last. remember it's value. It's not, the message people like me like to sell, get in, get out, and stay out. It's really a catchy saying. What you really want is value. What's the best value and the longest performance? That's really what you want in your system. Give you another example of things I wouldn't do, and this is actually a real job. I would have cut that out right there and fixed the whole thing at once. This might be a 50-year-old pavement, and he's leaving that, or she is leaving that part in when you could, it's not going to cost that much more because you're already there doing the work. So things to think about, examples. This is one everybody goes, that's reconstruction. And what you'll find, a rule of thumb in the business on full depth repairs is 10% slabs. I can show you agency after agency and report after report that somebody came up with that number and everybody copies it. Minnesota, I went on a job and every single joint was being replaced. And I couldn't believe it. I said, you got to be kidding me. And they got another 20 years out of that pavement, and they run a cost analysis to see what's effective. So the number of slab replacements should be based on your costs and your data, and not on the rule of thumbs. Partial depth is where you're doing a smaller segment of it. You can see on the top, and we're going to talk more about it, you've got the milling operations, and this is the more traditional where you saw it out and then replace it. We'll go through this. Excuse me. This is what most people would call spall repair kind of fixes. Always, the message I should have stuck at the beginning of this, always understand what caused what you're repairing. Because if you don't, you're probably not fixing it. And I say that, I'm making 40 years of mistakes. So don't do what some of the rest of us have done in our careers, but figure out what's actually causing it. And spall repairs, hopefully it's a construction defect. That has been my experience on a lot of them, but if there's something else going on, steel location in the slab, you need to figure those things out before you just go repair it. What you're going to see now is coming on, and this really is in the Midwest. They have a lot of joint-associated distress, and you're seeing milling. It's a lot more cost-effective to mill these things out, and a lot faster, and you'll be able to see a picture of it here. That's what it looks like. 20 years ago, all of us old-timers would said that's not how you do spall repair. So they've been doing this successfully for 20 years. You can see where they had they replaced the whole longitudinal joint in that section of pavement, and they can do it quite cost-effectively. They have to. It's actually deteriorated. Out west, we don't generally see that kind of an issue. So, okay, again, partial depth. The other thing I'll point out, in the old days, we always said T/3, don't go below that. Now the new procedure is you can go half the depth. My guess is that you saw that one corner repair right there. I'm pretty sure that one was a full depth, so it can be done, and people are doing it. Dowel bar retrofit, what you're seeing on the top is the actual type of equipment. This machine right here just cuts these slots right here, then a bunch of guys run in there with jackhammers and beat them out of the ground. And so you end up with slots like this. Notice this is a crack, not a joint, so you can do both. And then you come back in, you have your dowel bars in there, and I'll show you some more on that. The issues here is making sure, this is looking from the top down, that your backer board is beyond your excavation point in the same way in the cross-section view. If you don't, the concrete's actually just going to be touching each other. When you open up the traffic, come back the next day, you'll already start some of that spall repair stress starting for the next project. So this is, on this particular application, you got to make sure there is really good quality. And the other thing to remember, this partial depth or full depth, if I'm talking about one of those areas with 20 million people living in it, it better be set up really, really quick. And that's when it gets into more exotic materials and issues. That's what the saws look like. They're just setting a spacer right there. Again, just showing this is a skewed joint, so crack, skewed joints, transverse, doesn't really matter. One of the things the reason this slide's in there I want to point out is I recently did a evaluation of the LTPP SBS2 experiments, which was the concrete new construction back in the early 1990s. They're about 20, 25 years old, so we went back and looked at the data. When you look at the load transfer efficiency on some of those, there was a brand new doweled concrete pavement that after 1 year fell below the 60% criteria. 2 years later was at 90%. There's probably an issue with the load transfer efficiency trigger. So if you're using it, look a little closer. There's other things that come into play on that. Sealing and resealing, this is probably the most controversial thing in the concrete industry right now. I can get in a fight on either side. I've been on both sides of it. The issue is one size doesn't fit all, and that's what we always try and do. So eventually we're going to figure out, I hope, at least in somebody's career, probably not mine, when do you apply it and when don't you? It represents 5 to 10% the cost of new installation. So we darn well ought to know whether it's cost effective or not, and we really can't. One of the things I'll mention, in the urban areas, even Wisconsin, who led the charge back in the 1990s to unseal, to not seal, actually uses it in the urban areas below 45 miles an hour because the incompressibles and the slab growth. So you're pushing over curb, catch basins, and slab blowups. So slab blowups in the Midwest are still going on. People don't talk about it anymore. I actually thought it had ended about 20 years ago. As we've looked into it, it's a lot more common. Actually, Colorado just had some 3 months ago. Washington had some this last summer too, so it is going on. Slab stabilization, jacking. This isn't done as often. What you're seeing in this example is basically the jacking. So you look on the top, you can see you got a slab that one lane is settled relative to the other. So you raise it up so they're both the same. And then you're looking, really, in my mind, a pretty phenomenal improvement of what looks like to be a residential street. So slab stabilization, on the other hand, is where you're really trying to fill the voids underneath the joint. So there are different approaches, and make sure if you're speccing it, you know which one you're speccing. Cross stitching, that's where you're coming in and taking rebar, putting it in at an angle. I'll show you that in the next slide. And trying to hold together longitudinal cracks. Longitudinal cracks, if they're not moving, you can have pavements that are really, really old that have had longitudinal cracking. In Arizona, where I'm from, we used to build the Phoenix Freeway system, and I was one of the residents on it, and we did our ramp 16 feet wide with no longitudinal joints. Every one of them cracked. They're still there, they're still cracked, and some of them are 40 years old. So crack is ugly, but doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. What you'll notice here is the important thing I want to point out here. You're putting this in at an angle. Notice the angle over here. But this is what's critical. If you get too far, you can blow the bottom of the slab out. And if I'm the one who just did it, I'm pretty sure I'm not going to come tell you that I just blew out the bottom of your slab. And you're standing on the top looking down, you don't know that happened. So you're probably going to have a future performance issue. So that's, if you're doing this treatment, it's a very effective treatment. You just got to make sure someone's making sure they're not drilling too deep. Okay, what's the difference in the urban environment? I actually talked to our contractors to give you answers. This is a universal answer. That's your difference. Okay? The other one's going to be a little bit more obvious, and not so much because it's disruptive, because it is. There's you get into these high density areas, there is no way anyone's going to do any work in an urban area without it being disruptive. But it's also hard on the contractor. He can't even get some of the same equipment onto some of the job sites. So he's got to look at where he's getting his water from, where he's getting the slurry. The other thing I'll mention, particularly in what we might call these subclusters, when you really start getting into smaller communities, you're going concrete pavements that might be 60, 80 years old. Okay? And they also have all kinds of manholes, water valves, curb and gutters, all kinds of things, and they're in poor condition. So it's a much more difficult thing just to be able to accomplish, and I'll show you some pictures. Even things like lodging, you might not even be able to stay in the area. Obviously, the productivity is a lot lower. The jobs are smaller, more difficult schedules. Maintenance, protection, traffic, that's obvious. You got more. Interesting thing, I asked two contractors, and I said, well, what about the inspectors of the people walking by, the general public? He goes, yeah, they're always there. We don't listen to them. It's like, okay, doesn't bother you then. Let me back up. I missed a really important point. Product selection. That's where the differences are going to be on these kind of things, the products that you're going to use. You saw this earlier with Jason. Even the FHW requirements are different from the higher density areas. So, okay, now I'm going to do a little bit more specific on diamond grinding. The slurry disposal, remember you saw that piece of equipment with the arm sticking out, shooting stuff on the shoulder. That's not going to happen on an urban street because it'd go in the stormwater drain. So you've got to have some way to collect it. some way to get rid of it. The haul distances are generally farther. You may actually have to treat it prior to disposal, so there's all kinds of those things. Notice the one that says suburban level of expectation is more difficult. And I thought this was really interesting coming from the contractors. And what it really says is, I've got this old 90-year-old street, and when you're done grinding it, I want it to look like brand new. And that's a real challenge. And I'll show you a picture on that why. You got the manholes and water valves, interchanges, all those kind of things. So here's the example of what I'm talking about right here. So you got two choices. Remember, we can make it, and people don't believe this, but we can make it as smooth as you need it. That's generally not ever going to be the issue. But you understand the only way we make it smoother in diamond grinding is by removing something. So if you want me to remove 2 inches of that 7-inch thick pavement to make it as smooth as you want, we can do that. It's just not a good value for you guys. So there's always going to be the trade-off on value of how smooth you want it versus how much removal. If you'll notice these dark spots that you're looking at here, there's the water valve right there. There was where they scored around it. So what the grinder's doing is coming up and lifting up, coming back down the other side and continuing. Now there'd be an alternative. The owner could say, I'm going to lower the water valve and make it smoother, and he'd have gone right through it. These are all choices that you have to make. This is again showing where they ground right over a manhole. Again, this is promotional on our side. We always go down. Same way on driveways. The only issues we have on driveways is actually access. In an urban area, that always creates a problem. Notice they have not ground the intersection yet. The backhoe's just a little rabbit. He says, go get those cars all screwed up and we'll sneak through. I'm just being kidding. But you notice you've got businesses on all four corners. So the minute you start running that grinding machine through there, somebody's not going to be able to get in. The good news is they go about 20 feet a minute, so it's not a big deal. But it is definitely an issue. The other thing I'll mention, this is the largest county project that I'm aware of has ever been diamond ground. And this is a pretty cool community. It's Douglas County in Denver, Colorado. To figure out what to do, these pavements were typically 20 to 25 years old. They were faulted very badly. This is a more affluent. This is where Jason lives, by the way. Just Jason, raise your hand so we can another rich government guy picking on him. But they had like 7 and 8 inch thick concrete that's not doweled, and it was in many locations placed on expansive soil, no base. Worst case scenario. And the people don't like half-inch faults because you got actually some sports people living there. So they years ago developed their own distress guide. They created their own management system. They do their own data collection, and they finally convinced their council, we're going to go and repair all this, and this is how long it's going to live. And they did 500,000 square yards of grinding. And that's from Scott maybe have bigger jobs than that, but to me that was a horrendous project. But what this map is showing you is they actually went out and profiled their network that they were going to let out to work. And notice there's 3 different levels of roughness. They set their specs based on these levels of roughness, meaning the contractor wasn't required to get the same smoothness everywhere. Because they recognized that the 300 to 400 inches per mile, by the time you made that smooth, that 7 inches would probably be closer to about 6, maybe 5.5. And that isn't what they wanted. So this was a really good approach on how to keep in mind that you want a smooth road, but you want it to last. Utility cut repairs, we could probably argue whether that's preservation or not. It's part of the new CP Tech Center manual. It's a necessary evil of life. I'm going to show you another picture right here. I don't care for it all. That's not how I would have done that, but this guy probably knows more about it than I do. Just to give you other ideas. Okay, for some of the other treatments, what's different about the urban area? And it's just like location and real estate. Product selection, installation procedures. It's completely different based on the window and the traffic demands. You get into the 15 to 20 million population areas, and you're going to have work windows that are extremely short. Robert used to have gray hair, and he started dyeing it. He's only 29 years old. Because they have to deal with that. You get in the LA area and those kind of things, it's just unbelievable, or Chicago. And so you better have products that perform. If they don't, you're going to be back out there in actually a couple days. So it's a whole different world, and you got to have some experience on that. that's how precast comes into the picture. You notice I showed you that map earlier with the 15 to 20 million population centers. Notice the states are looking at precast just because you got to get in and get out of there, and they can do that very quickly. Most of them are still being diamond ground after they're installed, so it's not just a matter of setting it down and running off. The good news is you can come back later and grind them. So, rapid strength, it's not just precast. In California, they've developed a number of mixes that can actually accommodate this. I'm not going to read all that through you, just rapid set concrete mixes, but I'll just let you look at it. Just so you know, there is another option. You don't have to do precast. People have been doing those short windows, high traffic, with pourable materials. So all kinds of issues associated with it also. As any of this stuff, it has to be done right. And the more exotic it gets, the more complicated it is. Okay, in summary, concrete pavement preservation works in all environments and based on traffic and schedule. The appropriate techniques and products need to be selected. So the treatments are going to be the same. How they're accomplished is going to be different. And urban construction is generally more difficult and more expensive. And just so you didn't forget the first part of the presentation, President Reagan passed a gas tax increase in 1983 and was reelected in 1984. So the message needs to be, if you guys don't pass a gas tax, you're not going to be reelected. So, Mike gave some talking points. Am I out of time yet? I can go for 2 hours. You know that, right? Okay. What are the more common pavement preservation treatments used in urban areas? The same as everywhere else. If there's any questions, I'll answer that, but I think I covered that. What are the benefits of preservation for concrete? How about a 123-year-old street? Is there enough PCC pavement preservation, or should there be done? Every one of you ought to do complete concrete pavement preservation. There needs to be a lot more on just selling. PCC pavement preservation research, is it being done or should it more be done? Mr. Hicks or Dr. Hicks is going to be talking about this tomorrow, right? Yeah. SBS 2, excuse me, the LTPP 12, 11, and 12, and there's also a pooled fund called SBS 2, which is also looking at pavement preservation on the LTPP experiment. The answer to the question is no. There needs to be a whole lot more research on concrete pavement preservation. That's a very fertile area for anybody who wants to go into it. Suggestions on what state and local transportation officials can do to improve preservation for concrete. Remember I said why it's a working horse? Because everybody just lets it go as long as they can. Concrete typically has lasted 2 to 5 times longer than it was designed for, and it doesn't take people very long to figure out it does, so they put their money elsewhere. The question would be, had you preserved it, how much longer would it have really lasted? So, examples of best practice for tracking preservation for concrete within a PMS tracking / reporting performance of projects and PMS systems. In 2009, the Rigid Subcommittee, the FHWA Pavement Preservation Committee, did a survey of the state practices, and we got 38 states to respond. 60% of those responses appeared to have a trigger value. Not a single one of them was the same. So most people use composite statistics, so this is why in my mind, there's a huge need to figure out what's the right answer. We can't all be right. So anyway, any questions? Well, thank you.